Well, Dave Gardner, filmmaker, podcaster, and activist, welcome to the Deep Revolution podcast.
Good to be here.
We look forward to hearing about your story here. And I'd like to start, Dave, by saying, with this will be informal for sure, but I'm just really curious about your professional background in corporate media and how you transitioned from that into what you've been doing for the last, I don't know, maybe 15 years. Maybe you can tell a little bit of that story.
That's about right. And what an interesting question, because just at lunch today, I was reading a news story about deep seabed mining, some companies kind of putting a moratorium on that, and it reminded me of my corporate filmmaking days that one of the coolest projects I did as a film was a documentary documenting I think the first ever experimental deep ocean mining project.
Wow.
And I spent months following this project, and then eventually when this drill ship had been retooled to become an ocean mining vessel, went out on its maiden voyage and filmed the first time that they vacuumed manganese nodules up from the ocean floor. And this was just really exciting to me, and not for a minute did I stop and think, oh my God, what are we doing to the ecosystem down there? I was asleep for a couple of decades, really, while I was doing that corporate filmmaking work. That was what allowed me to do that. So I'm kind of ashamed. Well, I'm definitely ashamed of participating in that and not really questioning that and recognizing how potentially deadly that was. And I did the same thing, an early fracking demonstration I filmed, and I had no idea what lay ahead. So that's the short answer. But I did, I did spend most of my professional life as a filmmaker, 30 plus years. Started out as a corporate filmmaker, then went to PBS for a couple of years, worked on a PBS project, but the money wasn't good. I wish I had stayed, because I think turned out I'm a documentary filmmaker at heart, and it's hard to do that for Fortune 500 companies. But I needed more sleep and more money, and left that and went back to doing business films for Fortune 500 companies and big PR firms. And it was a wild ride, went all over the world on other people's nickel, had a horrible carbon footprint, learned the fine art of spin very well, but was gladly cashing those checks, trying to be a good provider for my new family. And I just had lost track of the conservation ethic that had been given to me when I was in high school.
So what changed?
What changed was it began to personally affect me. I built my business as a business filmmaker in a big city in Dallas, Texas, where there were lots of corporate headquarters, and started a family, had 2 children, got a vasectomy because I didn't want to contribute to population growth. I wanted to just thought I was being responsible family-sized decision maker at the time. But I didn't want to raise my family in that environment where people were shooting each other on the freeways, and you spent your life on the freeway. So my wife at the time and I made a quality of life decision to relocate back to a much smaller town where I was born and raised, Colorado Springs, and that was back in 1993. And we loved it. It was a simpler, quieter, slower life.
Yeah.
But I watched. For that first decade that I was back, I just watched that city. It seemed like it was hell-bent for leather to become as much like the environment I had left as it could. Its metric for success was growth, economic growth, and population growth to drive that growth. And it was making my life less idyllic. And so selfishly, I started paying attention to that and regretting that. I felt like like if I had bought a Corvette, but every day when I went out to the garage to get in my Corvette, it was a little bit more like an old pickup truck or something like that. My brand was, changing under my feet, and I just started paying attention and thinking, well, what are you going to do about it? You can't stop it. But then the drought, there was a big drought in Colorado around 2000, 2001. And that made me start thinking about water and how there's such a limited water resource in the American West. And I thought, you know what? That is going to stop this rampant growth. And yet it didn't. But that was when I started paying attention, researching, and became a local activist and a gadfly at utilities board meetings and city council meetings, saying, hey, you know what? It's a myth that we have to keep on growing in order to have a healthy city, a beautiful city, and a healthy economy. And eventually that research just led me to discover, oh my God, what we're doing to the planet. And suddenly my conservation ethic was reawakened.
Was there a particular moment when it really came back?
Oh gosh, it might have been more of just serendipity than anything else. Because I really was. I was really caught up in being a good provider. I bought into that whole American dream thing for a long time, and so my metric for success was was having a big house and nice car and being able to have my kids in good schools and give them good opportunities. And I wanted, and so making money was it. I didn't really question the projects I was doing for the clients. But then 9/11 happened. The World Trade Center towers were brought down, and business came to a standstill. And so I went from my biggest challenge was who to say no to. I was doing really well and had more work than I needed, to suddenly, all of the corporations across the country stopped doing anything. They were afraid to spend any money. They called off projects because there was real concern that the economy was just going to be long in recovering from that. And so suddenly I needed to find work. And I hated the idea of having to pick up the phone and, dial for dollars, make sales calls. And I decided, you know what, if I'm going to spend my time trying to find work, why don't I spend my time finding the kind of work that is meaningful to me instead of telling those stories? I did a film for Enron, but, I told Enron's story.
Wow.
Not Dave Gardner's story or Mother Earth's story, So I decided, you know what? Business is slow. What would I do? What story would I tell? And I was kind of in the early stages of getting involved and concerned about this crazy growth mania in the American West and the limited water. And I thought, you know what? I'll do a documentary about this thirst for growth, and I'll see if I can't raise the money so that I can, keep a roof over my head while I do it.
So what was your first film?
It was the Growthbusters documentary, Growthbusters Hooked on Growth, feature-length documentary film. I had done some little short videos helping Sierra Club. Anytime a good environmental cause called and needed a little bit of help, I wouldn't say no, and I'd produce a little video. But this was a big film project, and I set out to produce the film that I didn't think anyone else had done, and I made the mistake of starting work on the film while I was still raising money. So as a result, I never finished raising the money. I didn't raise the money I needed. It was all blood, sweat, and tears on my part, but it was still a fantastic experience. Probably took me about 5 years, really. Started a nonprofit, learned how to do that, raised money, did research, and actually there were some corporate projects that came in, not as many, but I took advantage when one of my clients had me fly to New York. Then I said, okay, who do I need to interview in New York for the Growthbusters film? That way I didn't have to buy another plane ticket or have the carbon footprint associated with a specific trip for that. So I did a lot of that. But my research, because I am a documentarian at heart, I think my research was filming these interviews. I didn't do pre-interviews. If I had time with somebody amazing, like Michael Brownlee, you were a part of that. I wanted to learn about transition towns at the time. So did I sit down with you and chat with you about it or talk to you on the phone about it? No, I went to one of your events with camera in hand and said, hey, can I film this? And so I ended up filming over 100 interviews with really smart people, and a tiny bit of that ended up in the film.
Yeah. So what was the premise of the film for those who haven't seen it yet?
Well, the premise of the film was that we have a love affair with growth. We think we can do it perpetually. We've built a system that depends on it, but it is ultimately unsustainable. I really set out, Michael, to do a film about population growth because that was what I was seeing in my own community. It seemed like that was what they were intent on doing, and I really wasn't aware of. I don't know why, but I really wasn't aware that we were so obsessed with economic growth, and that economic growth was in fundamental conflict with sustainability. But once I started researching this film that I was going to do about population growth, my eyes were open, and I discovered that economic growth may actually be the granddaddy, because a lot of our obsession with GDP growth is what drives our totally irrational and destructive public policy and metrics around population growth. So I ended up doing this film about our quest for growth that's unsustainable, really just a send-up of it, just something to put a big bright headlight on the fact that this is what we're doing and this is crazy.
And along the way, you got involved politically on the local level as well.
I kept that up. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there was a couple of paths that kind of converged, I think, to make that happen. One was that I was, certainly unhappy with the public policy decisions being made here, and it was worse than in most. I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which is a kind of a conservative little island in the middle of a purple, maybe even a blue state now. And why I didn't move to Boulder when I left Dallas or moved to Portland, Oregon or something, I don't know. I just hadn't really completely politically awakened. So here I am in this very conservative place. So that's the last city in the country probably to really adopt any kind of goals about reducing carbon footprint or doing anything sustainably. It's just grow. And it's run by developers. Developers and home builders are the biggest funders to city council campaigns and county commissioner campaigns, and they make sure that they keep a pretty tight grasp on the policy decisions here. So that was frustrating.
Colorado Springs has been one of the fastest growing cities in the country, has it not?
Yep, it's been pretty up there. Yep. But not the winner that, there's others that beat it in this crazy competition. Austin, Texas, a number of cities in Texas recently have been beating Colorado Springs, which is a source of angst for the growth-addicted policymakers here.
Yeah.
Not for me. It's something to celebrate. But I was really not, I wasn't really getting anywhere. So I decided. And then the 2008 crash of the national economy hit, and there was a city council election coming up, and our city was hit hard because we were growth addicts. We basically fund our services with the tax revenue from construction of new subdivisions. So if new subdivisions aren't being built, then it's really impossible for us to balance the budget. So our town we put our police helicopters up for sale. We stopped watering our parks. We closed the restrooms in the parks. We stopped collecting trash in the parks. Bus service was cut off on weekends and after 6 p.m. I mean, we made national headlines as being, in desperate times from the crash. So I just knew that the candidates who were going to run for city council would be all about, I'm going to restore that robust growth and solve these problems. Yeah. And I thought, man, we don't need that. We don't want that. We need another voice in there. So I decided, what the heck, I'm going to run. And I think it was helped a little bit by the fact that I knew as a filmmaker, I was in the middle of this documentary, I knew that I needed to do more than just have great interviews with experts. I needed some human interest. I needed a story in there. I had been looking for a hero who was crusading to save the world, to wake us up to our growth addicted ways. And I just hadn't found the perfect person or anybody that I had easy access to. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'm it. I'm the guy. And if I'm running for city council, that's a pretty good story too. That can't hurt. So it'll give me a chance to really, suddenly the things that I'm trying to say about sustainable public policy will be covered in the newspaper because I'm a candidate. I can follow my campaign with cameras and get some good and get a good story. And let's see. I felt like it was highly unlikely that I could win. Which probably made it a little easier to jump in because I was in the middle of a film. If I had won, who knows whether I ever would have finished Growthbusters. But at the same time, I'm not that competitive, but I'm just competitive enough that if I'm in the race, I'm going to do my best to win. And I also felt a real obligation to the people who joined my campaign committee and were out there pounding the streets and raising money and putting their effort in to get me elected. I wasn't going to just make this kind of just a film stunt, So I really tried hard to win, but I thought the chances were slim because I was going to run on telling the truth about growth. So one of my campaign slogans was, growth created the problems we have today. It can't be the solution to those problems.
So what happened in the election?
Well, we got some really great moments on film. That's for darn sure. Because the guy I was running against, man, he was definitely he definitely thought growth was the cat's meow, I tell you. And I ended up getting 43% of the vote, which was a lot more than I thought. I did better than I thought.
So you kind of did the Michael Moore thing of featuring yourself in the film.
Yeah, and actually Michael Moore had a lot to do with that because I back then, I'm not sure whether he had done a second film yet. His best work ever was the first documentary he did, Roger and Me. And I thought, wow, here's a guy who found a way to pack movie theaters, get people to pay $8, to see a documentary. Why and how? And so I thought, I will be Michael Moore-ish here. Definitely. So
how did it feel to come that close to winning the election?
Well, it felt good because one, I was going to be able to return my attention to finishing the film, which wasn't too bad, but two, that it wasn't a drubbing, it wasn't too embarrassing. And it kind of gave me hope that maybe in truth, people were more ready. I mean, I became pretty famous in town just as the anti-growth guy. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, a lot of people just think I'm the anti-sprawl guy. And, there's a difference. And I'm still to this day working hard to educate people about that I'm much more than an anti-sprawl person. But it gave me hope that I was maybe getting through to people. Although, here we are 10 years later. This year's the 10th anniversary of the Growthbusters documentary coming out. And I can't say that, I can say that we have a more progressive city council than I ever thought I would see. Most of the policy decisions they're making today are just as growth addicted as they ever were.
Mm-hmm. So it's 10 years later. So what would you say has happened? What's been the impact of Growthbusters?
A couple of things about that. One is I'm going to pat myself on the back. Brilliant to put my story of running for city council in the film. That's one of the first things people comment on about the film It really worked. It helped. It resonated. Two, there's a clerk at the grocery store where I shop who every time I go in there and he checks me out, he asks me when I'm going to run for mayor. To this day. Just 2 days ago, he asked me, when are you going to run for mayor? But the film, I knew I didn't have I knew I wasn't going to get a theatrical release deal like Michael Moore. Independent documentaries, very few get that these days. Almost nobody but Michael Moore gets that. But I needed to get the message in front of as many people as possible. So I held the world premiere on the day that the United Nations said we would be passing 7 billion population on the planet. And I thought, okay, this is a day when the news media are going to be looking for stories about that. And here's this film premiering. So you know what? I got a piece, Politico did a piece about the world premiere. Very good. Held the world premiere in Washington, D.C., which turned out to be a pretty good thing. Standing room only, which was kind of cool. But that was the only, the 700 Club actually did kind of a hit piece on me and the film too. But that was about the only, national press that the film got. So that was disappointing. But, I just continued to make the film available. I sent the film to Paul Ehrlich, the famous Stanford biologist who wrote with his wife The Population Bomb back in 1968, and who was interviewed in the film. And so as soon as I had what I thought was the final cut, I sent that to him, and the next morning he Skyped me in his bathrobe. He was so excited. He said, "Wow, this is great. Let me know what I can do to help you get this scene. But I also need you to make a shorter version so that I can show it in a classroom, in a college classroom." So I immediately had to go to work on making a shorter version. But Paul gave me a great quote that's on the cover of the DVD. This could be the most important film ever made. And so, you know what?
That's pretty good.
Yeah. If no one else saw it, I was okay with that because he was kind of a hero to me too. But we just depended on community screenings, and they happened. The Occupy movement was kicking up, and several Occupy movements held screenings. There was a screening on a houseboat in London, really around the world. Film festival in Taiwan, a film festival in Germany. I think it was in 12 pretty good film festivals, but not the big ones. The big ones weren't interested in this. They were afraid of the subject because it did talk about population. Maybe if it was just the economic growth, they might have been willing to touch it. But there's been this, probably 30-year-long now taboo on addressing the subject of overpopulation. So that didn't help. So for the last 10 years, people have been ordering DVDs or digital downloads that they can buy or rent. And colleges and universities have, usually it's a professor, who tells the library, we need to get a copy of this. I want to show this to my classes. And it's been a steady trickle of sales, and I've supported, I thought I would, I don't know what I thought. I thought I would make another documentary, maybe a deeper dive into some of the issues that were raised by the film, but instead I spent all my time really just, doing Q&A sessions after screenings, accepting invitations to talk to college classes, and talking to talk radio hosts and that kind of thing, and really just kind of appointed myself the ambassador, the media ambassador for being a growth buster. I was the growth buster, and why? Why do we need to get over this love affair with growth? And here I am now, 10 years later, and I'm still doing that. It never has, paid the bills. It's been, I basically was taking a vow of poverty when I decided to do the film. And have remained that way, but it's been the best, it's been the best 15 years of my life. It's been a meaningful life, and I've learned that I can have a lot of joy without having a big house and all the trappings of success that I used to be chasing before I really started digging into this subject.
Does it seem to you that 15 years went by pretty fast?
It's about half and half. Half seems like it's gone by really fast, and the other half seems like it's been grindingly slow because, when I decided that I was going to have the world premiere on the day, October 30th of 2011, when we hit 7 billion world population, I made that decision in January of that year, and I wasn't as far along as I needed to be, so I was suddenly on a deadline. So that year, I worked doubly hard to finish the film, and there was even in the final stretches, I had a really hotshot editor who I brought up from Dallas, and I was giving him room in my basement to live and letting him go mountain biking for breaks. But he was working on color correcting, and I was working on finishing up some of the editorial fine tuning, and we just had one system to work on. So I had to get up at 5:30 every morning to have my time, getting material ready for him to then come in at 11 to work on. And to this day, I haven't broken that habit. I haven't been able to get out of that early morning habit. I frequently am up at 4:30 or 5:30. Today, I was up at 2:30, which is crazy. So that has made it seem longer because I have basically I've been working 7 days a week for 15 years.
Yeah.
And it's starting to wear on me a little bit.
Starting to wear, yes. And it also seems to be what it takes to do this kind of work.
Yeah,
maybe we shouldn't tell people that,
Yeah. But it's, what? And, I used to think that being a filmmaker was the best job in the world. It was a blast. I was always learning somebody else's job. I got to see the world. But you know what? I think this is the best job because there is never a day that I wake up and I get out of bed regretting it. I mean, I get out of bed. I am ready to. I mean, it's kind of a standard joke at my house. If my wife asks me, "Why'd you get up so early?" My answer is, "I got a planet to save."
Yeah. Very good. So, one of the things you did after Ghostbusters was you started creating a podcast. I don't know when that started.
Well, yeah, and it kind of grew out of a radio series because I had, when I realized that I had so much interview material with such smart people that didn't make it into the film. I basically spent an hour with Paul Ehrlich. I spent an hour with you, everyone. And yet, 20% of them ended up in the film and they each only got maybe a minute of screen time. So I had this storehouse of wealth of great knowledge and material that I felt an obligation to share with the world. So I decided I'm going to repurpose that as a syndicated radio series called Conversation Earth. I'm going to give it away to any radio station that'll run it because I wanted, as many outlets as possible. And I got about 26 radio stations to carry it. But it was basically a weekly half-hour series, and there was a lot of work involved to take that, an hour rambling video interview and turn it into a tight radio episode that was exactly 28 minutes and 30 seconds, or 28:50. And so it was brutal. It was a lot of work. And I did 2 seasons, a total of 43 episodes, I believe, over the course of maybe 3.5 years. But it was killing me. But I learned about podcasts at the time. They were really becoming popular, even though they'd been around. So I repurposed that as a podcast because that's what every good radio show does these days. So I learned about podcasting from that. But I also learned that if it's not a radio show, if it's a podcast, then you're not necessarily stuck and committed to meeting a certain length and delivering week in, week out. And you can also relax your production standards a little bit. The podcasting had appealed to me for a couple of good reasons. One was being a filmmaker, I noticed that it was getting harder and harder to get people to sit down and watch a deep thoughtful, well-produced film. People, YouTube was getting to be really big, but if you had a YouTube video that was over 3 minutes long, nobody wanted to watch that. They were, the appetite was for a 1 minute, 2 minute, maybe if you're lucky, 3 minute video. Well, I can't tell this story in that kind of time. So, but a podcast, there's still an appetite for deeper, extended discussions because people can be multitasking. They can be farming, gardening, cooking, commuting, exercising, while they're listening to a podcast. So it's really the last great frontier for really meaningful media work. So a year or two after I stopped the Conversation Earth radio series, I went ahead and launched the Growth Busters podcast, and still producing that. And my goal is to do 2 episodes a month, but I've been a little bit distracted for the last year or two, and I haven't been quite meeting that goal. But I'm about to get back on that wagon, I think.
And I don't know a lot about it, but I remember you saying that you've gotten involved in local media and working with local podcasters there.
Yeah, I got a little bit of a distraction, but a good distraction when I discovered that there was a group trying to launch a community radio station here in town, and because this was 6-7 years ago, and the media in this town was pretty conservative, surprisingly, and we needed a progressive voice. So this struck me as a good way to get the citizenry a little bit better engaged and informed with more progressive, sustainably thought out messages. So I jumped into that, and part of that was from a long-term love affair with radio. I worked as a disc jockey here in my hometown when I was in high school, and did the same thing at the campus radio station, and then actually was a morning news producer at the public radio station in Dallas while I was in college, until I just needed sleep and had to give that up. So I really kind of have this love for radio anyway. So I helped launch this radio station, and that also kind of solidified my podcast knowledge. And I think I was drawn to it because it was a chance to have some real good wins. If you're a growth buster, you're in it for the long haul, and frequently you don't see a lot of signs of success.
Yeah.
I couldn't have picked a tougher thing to try to fix in the world than trying to get us over this crazy love affair with perpetual growth. So I think I need, my psyche just needs some little wins. So I really took to this idea of helping people in my community communicate. And so the radio station did not survive. There was a hostile takeover, and it's gone. But the good people who were involved in that gravitated to me because I was working on podcasts with Conversation Earth, and we've built a podcast collective here in Colorado Springs called Studio 809 Podcasts, with about a dozen podcasts that originated in our area, and most of them are really community focused and do a real good community service. And I'm still kind of the chief wrangler and heading that up, and I don't intend to stop doing that anytime soon. And we're really kind of occupying the space that community radio station would have occupied, but now we're delivering content that people can listen to whenever they want, how they want. So it's actually a better way than radio.
Interesting.
Yeah, especially with young people. Do a poll. Stop 25-year-olds on the street and find out how many of them have ever owned a radio ever.
Yeah, yeah.
Radio.
Well, that's true. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Media has changed really dramatically during our careers.
Yeah, but somebody pointed out to me just yesterday something I hadn't thought about. The one thing that radio was good at was it was helping people just discover it. If they were just tuning the dial, and they just have to listen to whatever you're broadcasting at the time. If it happened to be Conversation Earth, they get a dose of sustainable thinking. Whereas if it's a podcast, the only people listening to that podcast are people who, went specifically to listen to that podcast.
Huh.
So we got to figure out a way. I'm thinking of maybe putting together a van with some big loudspeakers on top of it and just driving up and down the streets blasting the podcast. No, it can't be a van. It's gonna have to be human powered, so it'll be a bicycle.
Human powered. Very good. Okay.
Yeah, no carbon footprint.
So I want to ask you about world population balance. How did that come about? Tell us about world population balance and your involvement with them. How did all that happen?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. It's a nonprofit based in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, but really working on global overpopulation literacy issues. And I discovered it when I was doing my research for the Growthbusters documentary, and I ended up interviewing the man who founded and still led World Population Balance at the time, because he had really good, strong messaging about human population growth and overpopulation. And his name was Dave Paxson. And when it was time, the organization was a little over 20 years old, and he needed to step back, needed to find new leadership. Somehow, we were talking, and we both were lamenting, where are we going to find somebody else who's as passionate and crazy as Dave Paxson or Dave Gardner? We were the two crazy, passionate people on this issue that we knew. And finally we said, you know what? It's got to be Dave Gardner. And I said, well, I could do it part-time. I'm committed to Growthbusters. I'm not going to close down Growthbusters, but I'd be happy to, do it part-time and see if we could make that work. So I became the executive director of World Population Balance almost 6 years ago. And I'm pretty proud of what I've done over the last 6 years, which is it really was a pretty regional nonprofit that wasn't well known outside of Minnesota, and now it really is a global leader and really well respected in advocacy around sustainable population. And we've just taken the great messaging that he had done and built on that and made it better. So we're even growing the organization. And as a growth buster, you might think, why would he want to grow anything? There are some things. There's some good growth. So,
yes, definitely. So, what's the mission of World Population Balance?
The mission is to alert, educate, and inspire, to make sure that everyone around the world is aware that we have an overpopulation crisis, that we don't have a population growth problem. I mean, we have an overpopulation problem. We can't just stop population growth and be in a sustainable balance on the planet. The scale of the human enterprise is, way outgrown the planet. So we have too many people, even though we have crazy overconsumption problems that need to be addressed too. We're so deep into overshoot that we have to include overpopulation in our solution, and then educate that the solution is it's a beautiful thing. It doesn't require dictating or legislating family-size decisions. Really, all it requires supporting informed family-size decisions, making sure everyone's aware of the crisis, and making sure that they're educated and empowered to have good access to family planning, so that they can then make what I consider the most loving, compassionate decision you can make, which is to choose a small family if you're in the mode of planning a family, and then inspire them to make responsible family-size decisions that will be like, it's almost like you have a form. If you're deciding whether to have children or how many children to have, you're checking one of two boxes. You're either checking the box for a bleak future or checking the box for a beautiful future in the decision that you make. And so it's, nobody has to die. Nobody has to be, there's been terrible mistakes made in the interest of reining in population growth. And those are bad mistakes, but they were unnecessary. All we need is for people to be fully informed and be empowered to make those responsible family-sized decisions. And so we've experimented with ways of getting the message out. It's a scrappy little nonprofit. We don't have millions of dollars to spend on our outreach. So we're constantly trying, to hit a home run, something that might get us on the front page of the New York Times. And the most recent one is billboards. We've been experimenting.
I want to hear about billboards. Yeah, because that's just about the last thing that you would think of today.
Yeah. It was one of those deals where it was a way to, we were looking for a way to get some media attention so that we might get a front page story on the New York Times, or maybe Stephen Colbert might talk about our project, or any number of ways to amplify the message without having to spend the $1 million that we didn't have. So billboards about overpopulation. That's a bold move, because it is it's an uncomfortable subject. People are just not really comfortable, a lot of people, about talking about that, mostly because they just misunderstand it. And we want to correct all the myths and the misassumptions and the misunderstandings, but we've got to get their attention first. So we built a really good website that if we could get people to go to, really explains, you could read the whole website, you could read in less than an hour, and it does a good job of educating and inspiring people. And we started experimenting with putting up billboards with the hope that these would generate some news coverage and expand the conversation. The first couple we did, we just did one in Minneapolis and one here in Colorado. But they went up right as we shut down for COVID back in March of 2020. So there weren't very many commuters driving.
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah, and the news, there was only one news story being covered, and that was COVID. So they didn't get much attention, but they got the attention of someone in Vancouver, Canada, who reached out to us later and said, we'd like to see some billboards in Vancouver, and we'll put some money behind it. And that gave us the resources to do more billboards, so they were hard to miss. And Vancouver wasn't quite as shut down, and we took the time to put together a pretty good media plan. So we issued a news release and hired drone operators to fly their drones and get good footage of the billboards, because we knew that the news media wouldn't, hopefully they weren't going to take their helicopter up to get the footage, and it's just challenging around freeways to get good shots anyway. So we did that, and we got some attention. In fact, by the end of the day, the morning that our news release went out, by that evening, I'd probably done 5 interviews with various Vancouver television stations and news organizations, and we just we went from being a nobody on the internet to our website. 2 days later, our website crashed because there were so many hits, and we got seriously trolled by Facebook. There were people who didn't understand what we were doing, who really tried to damage the reputation of the campaign. And in fact, there were, people were calling our ads were on big electronic billboards, but they were also on electronic displays on transit stops. So people were calling the transit agency and complaining. People were calling the billboard, the outdoor advertising company, and complaining. Who are these people trying to tell us how many children we can have? Mm-hmm. And see, that's the misassumption, that if you're trying to alert people about this issue, people just jump to the conclusion that you're trying to tell them how many kids they can have.
Yeah, it's control.
Yeah, and that's something, I don't ever say population and that word back to back, because you just don't need it. The only control we need is maybe a little bit of self-control. But
self-control, a rare thing these days.
Yeah. So I think what we learned was some of our messaging was maybe it was just a little too easy for people to misinterpret, and that we weren't as far along in educating the people and creating overpopulation literacy as we thought.
There's not a lot of space for copy on a billboard. What were some of the messages that you put up?
Well, the ones that I think were really well received, that I think were brilliant, were just celebrating small family decisions. We had couples who were smiling and climbing a mountain or hiking or, engaged in something fun, and it just said, "We chose one." And it had them and their one child. And we had one child-free couple, and it said, "We chose child-free." But then we had the URL of our website pretty big, so our hope was that people would go to the website. Those went really well, but the ones that were more about, I can't even think of any right off the top of my head. There were a couple that were really just way too close to prescriptive, talking about how the decision you make about how many children you have, will impact the future of your children, but not in so many words. And it was just a little too easy to misinterpret those, and we tried to have real diversity in the images on the billboards, and that ended up backfiring because we didn't put all the diversity on one billboard. So it was easy for somebody to assume, oh, only white people, huh? Or only black people, huh?
Only black, yeah.
We couldn't win, So, but I don't think that's going to be. So, two things came out of that. One is we wrung our hands a little bit and said, "Shoot, this is a sensitive topic, and it's really hard to introduce it with 3 words or 7 words at most on a billboard. We need some other ways to introduce the subject with a few more words." So we've already put together a really nice brochure that introduces the subject, so that activists have something that they can mail or hand to somebody where they've started a conversation. And we're the big project at World Population Balance this year is going to be to produce some YouTube videos that are a little longer than a 7-word billboard, but more in line with 1 or 2 or 3 minutes long, to dispel a lot of the myths. It's not hard to find really inaccurate messages about population on YouTube. And if you put a video up on YouTube, it doesn't go away after a month like a billboard does. It's there forever. So we're working on those, and I think we have some good ideas about some different approaches to billboards that I think might take off too. So we're not done with billboards, I don't think.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I think it's really interesting to take that kind of approach. It's really innovative, and so in your starting up with the billboard campaigns, I understand that you did some crowdfunding to initially fund that. And how did that go?
You know what? It went pretty well. We set a modest goal of $20,000, I think it was, so that we could do the first 2 billboards and all the testing and creative work and the drone photography and all that to go with those, and we were successful with that. And that crowdfunding campaign is now perpetual, and it's over $100,000 now has been raised.
Wow.
And their groups are able to do little sub campaigns. So there's a group raising money to do a billboard campaign in Salt Lake City. There's a group raising money to do a billboard campaign in Toronto. There's a group considering raising money to do a campaign in Northern California.
So that's a whole level of funding that you didn't have before.
Yeah.
So that's impressive, I think, and it's also, to me, really meaningful that one of the results of the campaign in Vancouver was you attracted somebody with financial resources who wanted to help, which I think I'm guessing probably had a significant impact on your budget.
Yeah.
So doing billboards is a really interesting approach to fundraising. That's
who knew?
Who knew? That's news. I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. And World Population Balance had experimented with underwriting announcements on public television and on educational radio stations. And the only metric they had to determine whether it was worthwhile or not was to see whether donations increased. And, as running two nonprofits now, I've run World Population Balance for almost 6 years and the Citizen Powered Media that's behind the Growth Busters project for 15 years. I never want my decisions to be driven by raising money. I don't want to do what I think will raise the most money. I want to do what I think will be the most effective communication and an inspiration tool. But sad fact of life is, you do need some money to keep the doors open and to run these campaigns, so you can't just ignore it. But I've found it has been a challenge, and it's been my least favorite thing to do is try to raise money for a film or a billboard.
Well, part of what's exciting to me about this is that it confirms my suspicion that, especially these days, as more and more people become aware of the depth and the urgency of our predicament, that there are a number of relatively wealthy people who would just love to put their money into something that is meaningful to them. And it's really hard for them to find that, So I think it's very encouraging.
That's great. And I hadn't thought about it that way. I know it's a little bit frustrating. I gave up my country club membership when I became a starving documentary filmmaker. So I don't really hang out with those people.
That's right.
So the billboard is a way to get, maybe get their attention. Yeah.
And of course, people with resources like that are approached all the time by people wanting money, but for them to be touched by a message that strikes their heart and to respond, I think that we need to explore that more deeply and think of ways that we can connect with people like that.
Yeah, good point.
And that's part of what I hope will be an outcome of the Beyond Extinction Summit that we'll be doing next year. There are a lot of people, I believe, who need to be talking to each other but aren't yet.
Yeah. And in fact, that even kind of takes me all the way back through my experiences with the screenings of Growth Busters, is how many times people have come up to me after a screening and said, wow, I'd been thinking that this is crazy, but I didn't know anyone else was thinking that too.
Yes.
And that definitely would apply to, sadly, maybe it's important and needs to happen, but certainly would apply to the work you're doing. And there's more and more. But that's amazing. I think it's pretty clear that over the last 2, 3, 4 years that it's still a small percentage of the total population, but it is a bigger and bigger percentage.
It seems to be rapidly growing. We've seen. The most obvious example that we've seen, of course, is came out of the UK 2.5 years ago with Professor Jem Bendell, when he it's so interesting. We've been exploring and trying to get our head around the issues of collapse, for years, and it's not easy to become informed about these issues because there's so much happening on so many different levels. And so when he published his paper on deep adaptation, he sort of captured everything into 34 pages. And one of the best summaries that we'd ever seen of our predicament.
And it went viral.
And it went viral. I mean, I started watching the numbers, and it hit six figures within weeks, and now it's more than 1 million people have downloaded that paper. And it's not a trivial paper. I mean, it's dense and it's troubling.
Yeah, it's not some guy riding a skateboard down the street drinking cranberry juice.
No, it's a tough message, and it got us to, well, it confirmed again our suspicion that all over the world people are waking up to the possibility that humanity could become extinct, possibly even in the relatively near term, in the lifetime of our children or grandchildren. But increasingly people are seeing that possibility before the end of the century. Well, it's like the population issue. It's been very difficult to generate public conversation about this, but we may be at the time where we can begin to do that. That we can bring together experts and thinkers and activists and maybe even spiritual and religious leaders, people from many, many disciplines, to come together to consider what are we really facing here and what do we need to do. So I feel like it's a moment in time. I don't know. We're thinking of hosting this event early next year. I don't know where we'll be with the pandemic by that time. We may be having another one by then. But it's a rare moment. So we say that we think that for the very first time in human history, there are now probably hundreds of millions of people who are concerned about extinction. That's really remarkable, And I've gone to a variety of conferences that have pulled together people from all over the world, and I've made a point of having conversations with a lot of people, and it's so extinction is not the first thing they talk about. But if you bring it up, you discover it's right below the surface for many, many of them.
Yeah,
that's excited. New.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I'm pretty confident about what I know about overshoot. I am not confident about what I know about, a deep revolution, deep adaptation, collapse. What to do with that? What to do? Yeah, that's an area that I can grow.
So one of the ways of asking the question is, will collapse solve overshoot?
Oh, okay. I've definitely been thinking about, I'm thinking about that, and I'll back up a little bit to maybe 20,000 square feet. The thing I'm wrestling with right now in this part of my journey on that is, should I be, how should I feel about the fact that it is highly likely that, that life as we know it is going to cease? Should I be celebrating that? Should I be, trying to, should I just be accepting that and be helping to figure out what we should do in case that there's something on the other side of that? And I'm really, I'm still struggling with that, trying to figure out what's a rational reaction to that, because it's almost tempting to just say, well, hell, I've been working really hard for 15 years to, kind of get the, to bust some growth and get us to start, behaving in a manner that is going to leave a world worth inheriting for future generations, and I think maybe I'm too invested in the outcome of my work, So that's one thing I think I'm learning, is not to be too invested in it, not to stop. But should I stop the work? Because it's unlikely I'm going to be successful. And but I think,
well, it is daunting, that for as many years as we've put in, our lives into this kind of work, the results on a larger level are just about the opposite of what we hoped for.
Yeah. But but I think the answer is you have to live with integrity. You have to live with yourself, and also there's some chance, that what we are doing, and especially what you're doing, Michael, will have a beneficial impact in some way. And then I think there's also the chance that we are creeping up toward a tipping point that we can't imagine. Maybe we're closer than we think.
Tipping point can go either way, in reading William Catton's Overshoot, the other side of overshoot is collapse. It's inevitable. If there is overshoot, there is collapse. And so we've seen enough of the numbers now, even the numbers that the UN is still holding on to about the growth of our population, that it's not slowing down by itself. People are not making the decisions on a global level to reduce human population. We're on this one-way train.
Well, let me beg to differ a little bit. I mean, people are making. I mean, there is a trend in the right direction. It's just not happening fast enough. And there's so many of us, 7.8 billion of us today, that that even with the rate of growth and the family size decisions being better and better, there's still this 80 million plus new inhabitants of the earth still. But we've cut family size in half in the last 50 years, 60 years. And what now we're seeing a lot, the headlines about this, there's a lot of alarmism about a baby bust, because there are now nations that are starting to experience or about to experience actual contraction of their population, not just a slowing down of the growth. And so the trick there is to make sure that people don't listen to the economists who are saying, you guys better get busy, you women better get busy incubating some more consumers and workers and taxpayers for us. I don't think that I think women are too smart to listen to that, but we need that trend to accelerate. So people are doing something, but of
course they are, and I don't mean to denigrate that, because many are, and it's not happening quickly enough. So that it appears, as people like Jem Bendell point out in a very dramatic way, that because of the failure to reverse growth, and the failure to including the growth of population, that has greatly accelerated the time when we are on the precipice of collapse. Yeah. And
so, go ahead and finish your thought. I interrupted
No,
you.
Please.
Well, so we started talking about this because I mentioned tipping point, and I thought I should have probably been more clear. It's pretty clear that we're approaching a tipping point toward collapse, but we might be, our advocacy work for more rational, sustainable thinking and behavior and policy, we might be approaching a tipping point there. I mean, human society might be closer than we think to embracing the joy of getting off of the growth treadmill. So we have to keep working just in case we're closer than we think.
Of course, but at the least, before the tipping point goes either way, it would be useful for us to together stop and have a conversation about this. And say, what do we know? Given everything that's been happening, what can we now say about what's likely to unfold or what's possible to unfold? And what is that asking of us now? and I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I can't remember exactly the context in which this was used, but you sort of posed the question of do we deserve to survive? And that's a question that many people are asking right now. Would the world be better off without human beings? And so that's a question.
The answer to that is way too obvious for the world, but the answer for human beings is a little trickier. Yeah.
So the other side of that question, that surfaces in this whole discussion of existential risk, the possibility of collapse or extinction, is, do we have a moral responsibility to survive? And that's a whole new conversation that is just coming forward, maybe for the first time. What is our moral responsibility at this point in human evolution?
Yeah, it could be like an intergalactic responsibility, huh? I mean, if we're like as unique as we think we might be, wow, we just don't want to fumble the ball on that.
Well, that's a good point. And so I think that's the kind of thing that we need to be exploring together. And so maybe before the tipping point goes one way or the other here, we have an opportunity to bring together, some of the best minds and hearts on the planet, to talk about these issues. And many of those people who have something to contribute to that conversation. Certainly people like Paul Ehrlich come to mind. I'm sure he has much to say about the possibility of human extinction or extinction of life on the planet, all of it.
He needs no encouragement, and he's pretty entertaining, but he's also pretty damn smart too.
He is, and we need smart people. We need our best and brightest and most compassionate and most deeply driven to open up. And one of the things that I've seen is that many of the people who are thinking about these issues and writing about them don't know about each other.
Wow.
And so it's a real opportunity. So for instance, there were two authors in France whose names I'm not going to be able to remember right now. They published a book in 2015 called How Everything Could Collapse. Interesting title. I mean, that will get eyeballs for sure. But because it was published in French and published in Europe, we didn't hear about it over here. And so they finally just recently got it translated into English. And so it's been published. So what they did was they reached out to Jem Bendell in the UK. They're academics, just like he is. And they asked him to write the foreword to their book. A very smart move. And Jem Bendell says, before they reached out to me, I didn't know these guys existed.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I'm astonished I hadn't heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we hope that we can create a forum where some of the communication that hasn't been happening can take place, and that we can look together and feel together and explore and be as absolutely candid and honest as we can possibly be.
Wow, sign me up. Sounds very interesting.
Well, we really look forward to your being a co-host for the Beyond Extinction Summit. I mean, in calling it Beyond Extinction, we want to immediately signal that we are not coming from the place where we are assuming that the possibility of extinction is becoming a certainty. We're looking at what could be beyond this very difficult time that we're obviously heading into here. And I've asked you to think about some of the people that that you might bring into the conversation. And I wonder if you've had a chance to do that. Who are some of the people that might be appropriate?
Well, the people that come to mind really quickly are, some of the best interviews that I've done, and just some of the smartest people, I think, are around these issues. Bill Reese, probably pretty high on the list because he's the co-originator of ecological footprint analysis, and everything he writes is, he was one of the last interviews I did for Growthbusters. He was about to leave the country. I had 40 minutes with him. That was it. And at the end of those 40 minutes, I said, geez, there's my film. 40 minutes with Bill Reese. Everything he writes is just really right on, and he's really knowledgeable. So he'd be high on my list. Mattis Walker-Nagel, who was his partner in originating ecological footprint analysis, who founded Global Footprint Network. Mattis is one smart guy who has really good sensibilities about sustainable living and isn't afraid to talk about all of the factors that lead to the scale of the human enterprise being too big for the planet. So those are two high ones on my list right there. Tempted to think Guy McPherson probably has a place. I
think it would be worth asking him to weigh in. Certainly, sure, he has something to say. He
is one of the better known people bold enough to be talking about human extinction for several years. He's kind of made a name for himself with that, and he has some good thoughts. I've got a list here somewhere. I should have had it pulled up. I wasn't ready to answer the question, but those are a few right off the top of my head. I'm pretty confident that I can come up with the 35 that you're asking me for.
I'd love for you to do 35.
Yeah, that won't happen. But
so we're hoping it could be that the number of voices could be around 75 or so total. I'm also next week talking with Michael Dowd, to see if he would be interested in being a co-host, because he has connections with a whole very different group of people who have something very important to say about all of this.
Yeah, he would be great.
So we'll see how all of that unfolds. But and meanwhile, we're looking to innovate ways that we can make an online summit much more participative. So that it's not just passive consumption of media, but people have an opportunity to ask questions, get into conversations with some of the speakers, and that the speakers have an opportunity to talk to each other, all of that kind of thing. So, we'll be, hopefully you'll be contributing to helping us figure all of that out as well.
Yeah, I would love to see that, because I really would like to make it so that people aren't jetting around the world to attend conferences in these times when we really do need to, even though it's a small part of the whole puzzle, reducing carbon emissions. And it's challenging. We got to figure out a way to, if you're sitting at your desk, it is way too easy to multitask, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have to send everybody a little kit with some kind of electrodes that they attach to their body, and they get an electric shock if they stop paying attention and start reading their email or something.
Very good.
Sorry, I've always been the class clown, so I'm always going to try to think of something goofy.
Well, this is the time for innovation. I think that we have the opportunity to do something that will perhaps be historical.
Well, I have to just applaud you for the vision and the persistence to aim for this. It's a great idea.
Well, I think where we're at, between precipices, this is it. This is the time where we have to unleash everything that we have. This is it.
Yeah, and you better do it next week, because 2 weeks from now could be too late.
Could be too late, yeah. And that's one of the questions that needs to be asked in this summit. Is it too late? And if it's too late, what's it too late for?
Yeah.
Let's get clear about these things. Really appreciate your willingness to jump in, and it's a great privilege to have you involved with this, Dave. And I think we're going to learn a lot.
I just thought of somebody that I bet isn't even on your radar screen that I will definitely invite. George Trembath, an Australian who wrote a great novel called Pachacuti about this kind of what might happen, if some people get together and make good plans for how to go through this process. It'd be real interesting, because this guy wrote this novel, over 10 years ago. He might have some interesting thoughts about that.
I'm sure. And there are other authors, of fiction works that or are borderline prophecy, maybe we can bring in as well. Science fiction writers have been famous for looking into the future. And we also want to include some astrophysicists and astrobiologists, and importantly, a whole field of study that's rarely represented in public discourse is ethics. So we want to bring in some of the world's leading ethicists, because they've been thinking about this for a long time.
Don't you think we need some neoclassical economists as well?
Oh boy.
Yeah, let's see if we can't get somebody from the American Enterprise Institute. No,
oh wow.
Those are the growth addicted.
Well, that's an interesting thought, to bring in voices from the other side, if you will, who have a very committed viewpoint. What do they have to say, in the face of all of this? I went to a transition conference in London a few years ago, where one of Rob Hopkins' really brilliant strategies was to, I think it was the equivalent of the Secretary of Energy for the UK. He invited him to come to the conference to be the keynote listener. And then at the end of the conference to say to everybody what he heard. And I think we could do something like that.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah. Why not?
So
I wasn't thinking it would be very productive when I brought up the idea, but that's an interesting
I think it could be, and it's in the name of diversity, if nothing else, we have to bring in a wide range of voices.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to find a way to include some journalists, some people who might go back and report out.
Yeah, good. All right, Dave. Thank you very much for this today, and hopefully this will be the first of many more such encounters.
Well, I can't say no to you, Michael, even when you make me talk about myself. So thanks for giving me a chance to tell some of my story, and thanks for the really important work you're doing. And anytime, sir.
Thank you. And as we say, thank you for being an evolutionary catalyst.